Greetings folks, I hope you saw my first hands-on impression with this chunk of a lens, the 35-150 f2 to f2.8. Just went up a couple of days ago and I gave you some sample files, talked about the handling and my overall first impressions on the very first day that I got it in to test out. Now, I've gotten loads of comments and feedback from you guys, and fortunately over the next week I have 3 different portrait sessions already set up, so I'm going to be able to integrate this to them and get all kinds of different test shots for you guys. So I'm planning to see how close, or what's the reproduction at 150 mil, how close to 150 mil are we exactly? How's the image quality in all different variables, sharpness, contrast, all of that good stuff at different focal lengths and different aperture settings, both in isolation and if we're comparing it to the 28-75 and the 70-180. I'm guessing a lot of potential customers for this are already in with Tamron, so these are a known quantity for you guys, so it's a great control point to show this one. Now, for the shoots that I have coming up, in about 2 hours time, I have an amazing athlete, Jimmy, coming in to shoot with. Him and Felicia and Honey are all coming in this week. I'm filming the final parts for my dramatic single light portraiture masterclass, where we're showing you a whole bunch of different techniques to just use a single light to get great results. By the time you're watching this, that will already be up either as a pre-sale or fully live. So you can check it out as a link below. It's completely suitable for work. It's suitable for photographers that are beginners, intermediate, or anyone who wants to brush up on indoor, outdoor, on camera, off camera, continuous flash, how to read the room, think of the results you want and get there using just one light instead of a whole bag of different equipment. So for this first shoot with Jimmy, I'm going to use all 4 of these lenses on the A7R4, shoot through, and I'm actually going to be doing tutorials about sculpting muscles using hard and soft light and using a single light as a main key light and also a background fill light. So as I'm going through that, I will be conscious of how this lens is performing, get some different test shots for you, and I'll report back to you before I go out and shoot with Felicia at a Chinese gardens and then figure out what I want to test next based on what I find tonight. So let's rearrange this room and get ready to shoot with Jimmy. So let's compare the 70-180 and the 35-150. I'm going to shoot them both at 70 and 105 and their longest focal length, not moving from my position, at f8. And let's see how they're comparing. So. Hey folks, so that was a really fun shoot with Jimmy. I'm kind of not utilizing his talents. He's an amazing aerial artist. I actually shot with him recently and I think you'll see more of him on the channel. But for the single light course, we were doing how to shoot muscles and how to use one light to do double duty. That all worked out great. And as you saw, I did compare the 70-180 and the 35-150. In terms of handling, this is obviously heavier, but in terms of responsiveness and accuracy of focus and tracking in that situation, it seemed to be doing equally well. Looking at the files, there was some variation in the files in the end, being that I didn't shoot one and then the other back to back. There was slight variations in pose and, you know, for example, the focal lengths aren't all written on here. So as I'm taking the shot, sometimes I was at 105 versus 101, that kind of thing. So some small variations, but in terms of sharpness and contrast, I didn't notice a big difference. And it was mainly attributable to where the focus was exactly in the shot. Now, I want to test it more, obviously. So tomorrow I'm doing an outdoor shoot at a garden with Felicia, who you might remember from the Vintage and Retro course, and also the Digital Rev Hotel course, both of those over at Art Nude Portraiture. And for her, I wanted to compare probably against both of these. How is the bokeh wide open at different focal lengths? and how's the flare resistance, because I'm going to be doing a module for dramatic single light on intentionally creating flare. So let's see which of these actually does best at controlling flare in case you don't want it. Also had people asking for shot testing, people moving towards and away the camera to see how it's doing with that kind of directional movement in tracking and how this lens keeps up with it, so I'll do that. And we're in the middle of a typhoon here in Hong Kong, so the lenses may get an unintentional weather sealing test as a bonus, so let's see. Time to pack up. I'm meeting her first thing tomorrow morning for the second shoot for this video. So it was an incredibly fun and hot shoot. If you're following on social media, you would have seen some of the behind the scenes hijinks. We shot away for the different tutorials. We first tested out the bokeh, comparing the 35 and 50mm wide open settings on the 28-75 versus this lens. And then around 105mm on the 70-180. And here's a shot right out at 150 for good measure. Okay folks, so we're just taking a minute out. I was actually doing a tutorial then on intentionally creating flare using this manual f1 lens, and it looked pretty cool. But I thought let's now compare the 28-75 and the 70, I can't even talk, 35-150 at 50 and see which one has the best flare resistance. So we're going to try and keep the same pose. Oh, and there's ants on my camera. I guess that means it's going to rain again soon. Okay, lens change. So taking a look at the flare shots, it's really hard to recreate it, and I don't know why I shot some portrait, some landscape, but generally speaking, it's close, but I actually think the 28-75 is suppressing the flare a little bit more. If you take a look at this shot in particular, yes, you notice the flare across her chest and on the right of frame, obviously on the left, but take a look at it here with no flash added, and then again with the flash in, and you'll notice how washed out the bottom corner is, and just there's a lot of it pervasive in the scene, and it's not nearly as directional in the frame as this shot was with the 28-75. Next up, let's test focus speed. Okay, so a lot of you asked about tracking moving subjects, and I was surprised there was actually several people asking specifically to have people walking towards camera to see how it's doing. Now it's too hot to make her do it too many times, so I won't try for jogging more than once. But we have a nice curvy little street here. The beauty of, you know, the focal length, I'll start zoomed in on her, and as she comes closer, I'll keep zooming out. I'll switch to just JPEG because I don't need to fill up with 100 raw files of this, but I'll put it to high continuous and see how the hit rate is with full tracking, eye autofocus with this guy as she comes towards camera. Okay, so coming back in from my time shooting with Felicia, just to give you a background on the sports testing. I did several versions of her walking down that windy path, and then I did 2 or 3 of her running towards the camera. And I was actually surprised that the hit rate didn't seem great. So I did try another set of settings, changing the tracking sensitivity and also the release priority. So going to AF priority rather than balanced, and increasing the sensitivity so it would move quicker to stay with her. And it certainly slowed it down, and the keeper rate was a little bit higher, but it took far fewer images, like a third of as many shots as it did when I had it in the default settings. I also mixed in the 70-180, and it seemed to get more in sharp focus than this guy. But it was, however, so hot and humid, I didn't want to keep running that test again and again and again. But tomorrow I'm shooting with Honey for the Dramatic Single Light Masterclass, and she's an absolute beast and sports fitness guru, so she'll be able to run several times. So I'm going to do a few more tests. I don't want to discount the new lens because of a dodgy test, so we will do more of that in the next section and see how it performs there. One thing I can say though, being so hot and humid and an exhausting day, the weight of this did start to become an issue. And having read all of your guys' comments, I can see the concern about this not having a tripod foot, especially between before and after shooting with Felicia. The new Sony 70-200 f2.8 version 2 has been announced, and it's actually 100 grams lighter than this, and it of course does have a foot. So yes, hand holding it all day does start to get heavy, especially if you're not used to heavier lenses. And the fact that it doesn't have that foot, I don't know if I would want to have, you know, a 1.1, 1.2 kilo lens hanging off the front of my camera on a tripod for extended periods of time. I imagine the mount is rated to take that kind of weight, but it's just a different experience to how we're used to shooting with bigger, heavier lenses, especially once you've zoomed out. It is front heavy, so you know that's a lot of strain to be putting on the camera. Anyway, we have one more shoot. If you want to skip ahead, you can see my full thoughts in the conclusion. I'll put a timeline down below. If you want to check out the masterclass for dramatic single light, just a note, it isn't only Jimmy, Felicia, and Honey in that one. It's actually, I filmed the majority of it in the States, so it has Steph and Johanna and Yasmin and a bunch of familiar faces that you would know. It's around 5 hours of 4K content in total, so you can check that out, links below. Now, let's head back into the city and do our final shoot with Honey, and then I'll give you my final thoughts on this lens. Hey folks, so the shoots are going great so far. We're just taking a moment out now to head out onto the street. Fortunately, Honey's super fit, so I can get her to run back and forward several times to compare this guy to the 70-180 again. I'm going to lock it all down on a tripod, try the exact same settings on each of the different lenses, so the only difference should be the performance of each individual lens, and let's see how it actually does. We've got a good hour to do this. I'm going to do it multiple times to make sure my results are definitive before we come back in, and then we're doing a water drop shower shoot as the last one for the dramatic single light course. So let's head out. Okay, so taking a look at the shots we did out here, we did some with her running down some stairs, but because she was obviously watching where she was running, her face was away from the camera a lot. In that test, the 70-180 was doing better, but I wanted to do another one with her running uphill where we could keep eye contact. In total, I'd say we ran the tests a dozen times, probably 8 times with the 35-150 and 4 times with the 70-180. And whilst it's not doing a bad performance, it's clear that the 70-180 grabs focus quicker, stays with her more accurately. I get more shots off in a burst, and I get more of them in sharp focus. The 35-150 was just back focused on a lot of the shots, like it couldn't keep up. Okay guys, back in studio now. I am officially exhausted. Great day shooting with Honey. I've now had 3 good long days of shooting with this, with Jimmy, and then with Felicia, and then with Honey. I really feel like I've put it through its paces. I'm gonna run through the pros and cons on it so you can make a decision for yourself. The TLDR is, it's not a lens that I would buy for myself, but that's personally that's fully a personal choice, and it doesn't necessarily mean anything to you. It's a great range. If 35-150 f2 to 2.8 is going to work for you, really think of it just as a 2.8 by 85. It is a 2.8. The f2 is just at 35 and a couple of mil past that. Then great. And if the price tag works for you, the weight works for you, super. I don't think any of us realistically thought that this was going to be optically replacing a whole bag of primes and that it would just be the one lens to end all lenses. The hype can get you feeling that way, but realistically we're photographers, we know what's possible in a lens, and I wasn't expecting this was going to just blow everything out of the water. I do think if the range works for you, it's performing well, go for it. But do keep in mind, it's big, heavy, doesn't have a tripod collar, and it is still fairly expensive comparing it to the other ones in this kind of ballpark. However, as I showed, the flare control isn't as good as the 28-75, and the AF tracking isn't as good for moving objects as the 70-180. But in studio or for slower moving things, focusing just fine and accurate. That's basically all it comes down to. Does the size, weight, and price work for you? Does the aperture and focal length work for you? Or do you want something smaller and lighter? Now that Sony have released the 70-200 with great close focus capabilities, it's lighter, it's an extra $1,000 above this one, it does make the decision a little bit more complicated. For me personally, I'm only using Sony for video. I use the a7S III, and in that case, I already have the 70-180, the 17-28, and the 28-75, and I'm very happy with them. I would rather have smaller, lighter lenses on the camera and have others in the bag because they're in the bag. It doesn't bother me. If it was for stills and I didn't want to be changing lenses all the time, then maybe. But I already own these and they do the job for me. And for video, I actually do want the camera to do some of the focus heavy lifting for me. I'm often, like today, filming by myself with 3 or 4 camera angles, and knowing that one is going to really stay with the eyes even if there's erratic movement is important. So I want the best results that I can on that. For stills, I'm happy to do the heavy lifting, and I think anyone with a bit of shooting experience can get great results with just about any of the mirrorless camera combos out there now. So that's kind of my TLDR. Is it going to work for you? There's my results. That's how I have found it over the past week. I'm sorry, I'm really exhausted at the moment. I hope you found that useful, though. I wanted to get this to you soon because I know pre-orders are open now and a lot of people are really excited about this guy. Don't mean to be a Debbie Downer. It is a great lens. Just be aware that it's a chonk and that it's not just, a panacea that does everything perfectly. Do check out the Dramatic Single Light course. It is below. It's great. It's about 5 hours long. Loads of different techniques on how to create really cool results with just one light. Leave me any questions or comments. I've got this for another 5 days or so, so I may be able to answer any questions that you have. Thanks. I'll see you soon.